1 million people killed in just 2 weeks, nearly 100,000 lives lost every single day. This was the bloodiest battle in human history, yet few have ever heard of it. The Battle of Berlin would mark the final collapse of Nazi Germany and draw the curtain on World War II in Europe. By early 1945, the Nazi regime was on the brink of annihilation. In the West, American, British, and Canadian forces had crossed the Rhine, advancing deep into German territory. In the east, the Soviet Red Army had reached the Oder River, just a few dozen kilometers from Berlin. Stalin knew this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Capturing Berlin would not only be a military triumph, but also a decisive political blow, securing the Soviet Union's dominance in Europe before the Western Allies could enter the capital. The order to attack was given. Two of the Red Army's most celebrated commanders, Zhukov and Konev, led millions of troops in a massive final offensive. But in Berlin, Hitler still ordered the city to be defended at all costs. He believed that one last fortress could bleed the Soviets dry, prolong the war, and perhaps deliver a miracle. Meanwhile, in the shattered streets, tens of thousands of German civilians lived in constant terror. The thunder of artillery from the east grew louder with each passing day. Families huddled together in freezing underground shelters, eyes filled with despair, waiting for an end they could not bear to name. Berlin had become a battle of ambition, of time, and of sheer desperation. Before the battle began, both sides had mobilized to their absolute limits. On the Soviet side, more than 2.5 million soldiers, nearly 6,300 tanks and self-propelled guns, over 7,500 heavy artillery pieces, and more than 2,000 combat aircraft. A colossal war machine channeling its entire strength toward one single objective: to crush Berlin, and to avenge the millions of Soviet soldiers and civilians slaughtered by Nazi Germany over 4 long years of war. On the German side, only about 750,000 troops remained, most of them raw recruits, aging veterans, and the Volkssturm militia. They had around 1,500 tanks and self-propelled guns, over 3,000 artillery pieces, and a few hundred aircraft, most running short on fuel and experienced pilots. Yet they constructed a dense web of defenses, anti-tank trenches, minefields, barricades, and entire streets transformed into fortresses. Both sides knew there would be no room for mercy in this battle. On April 16, 1945, Soviet artillery opened fire. Over 20,000 guns roared at once, turning the German Oder River defenses into a blazing inferno. The earth shook, explosions echoed for miles, and rows of trees and buildings were torn to pieces. After the devastating bombardment, Soviet T-34 tanks and infantry surged forward. The Germans fought back fiercely, using anti-tank guns, machine guns, and even handheld Panzerfaust rockets from every corner of the streets. The battle quickly devolved into brutal close quarters fighting for every single meter. Every building, every floor, every room had to be taken by force. Smoke, dust, and the acrid smell of gunpowder hung thick over Berlin. German soldiers, desperate, fired from fortified positions, but were slowly pushed back. Bridges were blown up, streets were littered with the blackened hulks of burned-out tanks and piles of rubble. Screams, gunfire, and the thunder of artillery merged into a constant, deadly symphony that echoed day and night. As the Soviet assault closed in on central Berlin, the fighting became even more ferocious. At night, the skies still burned bright with flares and ceaseless explosions. Red Army troops fought from building to building, using grenades and flamethrowers to wipe out the last strongpoints. German forces clung to underground bunkers and subway tunnels, turning them into their final fortresses. Civilians huddled in shelters, hearing the relentless bombardment above, fear gripping every street. On April 25th, the Soviet encirclement snapped shut. Berlin was completely cut off. The Luftwaffe was all but gone, while Soviet artillery pounded the city center, each shell bringing down another building. By late April, the Germans were fighting in only a few blocks around the Reichstag and the Führerbunker. Many soldiers had already thrown down their weapons, knowing there was no escape. On April 30th, 1945, the red flag was raised over the Reichstag. Berlin had fallen. Adolf Hitler committed suicide in his underground bunker. The last gunshots in the Nazi capital fell silent, and the war in Europe was entering its final act. As the smoke cleared, Berlin was nothing but ruins. In just 2 weeks, over 1 million soldiers and civilians were killed or wounded. Nazi Germany lost around 450,000 troops. Tens of thousands of civilians starved, froze, or perished under relentless bombardment. The Soviet Union also paid a terrible price. More than 80,000 soldiers killed and over 270,000 wounded. Many of Germany's top generals either took their own lives or were captured alive. Some tried to escape disguised as civilians, but most were eventually dragged before military tribunals. The streets were littered with the blackened husks of tanks. Underground shelters overflowed with the wounded, and a once proud capital was reduced to ashes. The Battle of Berlin was not only the final blow to Nazi Germany, but the decisive strike that brought World War II in Europe to its end. On May 8, 1945, Germany formally surrendered unconditionally. The guns of Europe fell silent, but the memory of the bloodiest battle in human history continues to haunt generations.